But you will agree with me that the role of the father seems to have changed over time with the generations. I remember, you know, I'm not saying whether it's right or it's wrong. I remember as a child when you hear your dad's car, once they horn, pop, 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 everybody goes hiding. But of course, it's changed these days. So that's why we're talking about the evolution of fatherhood today. And so what we try to do is to bring people from different generations to talk about their view on fatherhood. So I think the oldest father out of all of us is Mr. Nobolu, so we're going to start with you. What's the role of the father?
Okay. I really would have, maybe I should do a very quick trace of that evolution that you're talking about from my perspective. Just 2 minutes. And I think what we're really referring to comes from parenting styles. And that is what really has shifted over the years in my view. And I'm sure that Dr. Abayomi, you doctors are the ones who did research that told us that there are 4 major parenting styles, that you can either be authoritarian, authoritative, permissive, or hands-off. And I think that one of the ways that fathers in the olden days played their roles have changed over time. In the 50s, 60s, up until the 70s, and those kinds of periods when we were growing up, that father was mostly an authoritarian father. I mean, basically, that's what you just described. When anyone hears fathers, daddy's horn, everyone's kappas, including your mother. That father was breadwinner, was a disciplinarian. He was stern. And he would, like I said, discipline both mother and children alike. Those men were never wrong. They never apologized to anyone in the family. He has no visible failures. They always hide any iota of vulnerability. So, which is where, you know, all those things came from. I was always first in my own time. What kind of
everybody was?
Everybody was first in their time. But they had very strong points. He will give his last shirt to defend and protect his family. And they largely expected the mothers to be the ones who sort of brought up the children properly, taught them good manners and conduct and all of that. That man basically dictates his children's professional vocation or professional vocation, often from his own perspective. They always had very clear perspective of what they believed that a responsible father or a responsible career would be. So a lawyer, a doctor, an engineer, and those kinds of things. So this came from their kind of, they were real, they were sometimes like terrorists, emperor terror, as it were. In the 80s and 90s, though, the fathers of the 80s and 90s, and I think this is where I enter maybe the era when we started to father children in the 80s, early 80s. Those fathers of my generation seem to have taken quite a lot of the good things that they saw in their own fathers. They have taken the strong points, that firmness, that discipline, that focus, that breadwinning quality. They have balanced it with more permissiveness, if you like. They're more involved, more flexible. They allowed their children more room for self-determination. They boosted their children's confidence. They were certainly less authoritarian. But things seem to have changed. Even though many fathers today are still just actively participating in their children's upbringing and all that, it appears that that shift, which we saw in the 80s, 90s, has moved to being a lot more permissive, if not mostly permissive. The trend moving again from, say, like 10 years, 15 years ago, seems to be going southwards, where in recent times, many seem to have lost sight of that role, that firm guide, that coach, that mentor, that sort of strong father figure. No, maybe no longer there. And I think the result is that many children are now brought up by more distant, even remote influences. Anything from TV to house helps to social media and to their own peers. There are weaker family ties, weaker family values, less mental toughness, and grit. So for me, you now come to a point where you can track all of that to, yes, the father, and to the challenges in our society, the decays, the system breakdown that we have seen in whatever areas of our lives. It's very, very easy to track that to the kind of fatherhood, the way that fatherhood has evolved, I think, over time. It's not only here, I think internationally as well.
Thank you so much. Reverend, do you want to contribute to that?
Yes, I want to add that without any doubt, the religious society has also sort of declined in our effort at instructing the fathers as to what their roles should be at home. Unlike before, the church, the mosque, and even traditional religious organizations, they played vital roles in setting moral standards that they expect the fathers to implement in their various homes. In recent times, that seems to have changed. So, and I think, like the first speaker said, it's a societal thing. And it's not limited to our society here, particularly because of the influence of the social media. We are now in a small global village. So the Western culture is having a lot of impact on the issue of fatherhood in our contemporary society. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Please like and share on your timeline. Elelubumi Ayodele Grace Iyanwa Omo Akwabi Oduak Abiodun Olageshi Bumi Anifalade Bumi Hybrid. Thank you for joining us. Now, as you were talking, so Pastor, what you were saying is that, you know, in Christian light, we say the husband is the father is the priest in the house.
Yes, sir.
That is gone. It's going. Let's say many homes. It's going.
Almost gone.
Okay. And when Mr. Onobolu was talking, I remember, you know, that was when my daughter, Onos, before you jump in, I just want to state this. You know, when my daughter was in a particular school in Lagos, in many years ago, and so there was a particular girl that went to the counselor. The counselor told us the story later. And she appeared, the girl was one of the terrible girls in school. And then, you know, it was obvious she was disturbed. And then, so during the time the counselor was talking to her, they saw that the father was the problem. It was actually, even when he's in Lagos, they don't see him. The only way he communicates with his family is through phone. So maybe, I don't know whether he has other families in Lagos or how he does that. So it was like an absent father. And this girl was just completely rebellious. If there's any breakdown of anything, she'll be involved. Until the counselor was able to get to that, until she opened up. So we see that the role of the father is very, very, very important in upbringing of children. Or no, do you want to jump into this? You have to unmute yourself.
Audio.
You have to unmute yourself.
I've unmuted myself.
Okay, now we can hear you.
We can hear you now.
Doctor, I think, you know, a number of things have happened, and I would use myself as an example. In the 70s and 80s, I was growing up, and my father, we used to call him Ojuku, because, I mean...
Did you do that?
Yeah, his nickname, all my friends still call it, when they remember my dad, they say Ojuku. And it was simply because the man was like a terrorist, you know, but a loving terrorist, a very loving terrorist. For his time, he was considered permissive, you know, he allowed us get away with a lot of things. But what I can say is that failure of many strata of society has created a big monster everywhere in the world. I remember that as a young boy going to school, my school fees was 27 naira per term. I still have some of those receipts. And my father was a civil servant. So it meant that, and a very, very straight civil servant for that matter. So there was no likelihood of corruption. No EFCC could carry him. We knew that one. Nobody could give him a bribe. We would call the police for you. But what happened was that by the time the educational system broke down, healthcare systems failed, it put a lot of pressure on fathers that we simply saw our role as providers. So we jet out in the morning and come back very late at night under the guise of that we got to provide for our families. But in that same vein, we lost out on what our own parents gave us. So today, husband and wife work. They work very long, horrible hours. So the children are left in the hands of nanny, maid, governess. You know, doctor, you know, we have seen people who have 2 governesses for 2 children. And you can imagine what would happen to those kind of children when they grow up. They will neither be like their daddy or their mommy. They will be like the governess or the houseboy or someone. So we really need to retrace what created this. There is a commercial or a capitalist tendency all over the world which pushes men to want to provide. It's coming out of the fact that we don't want to be worse than infidels. So we run too much and somehow we miss it. Today, many of the children we find, they are on their own. And we were not on our own. If you go out of line, I see my dad was Ojuku, you feel the brunt of Ojuku quickly. But if you are not there, you won't even know that the child has already committed heinous crimes everywhere around you. So it's a balance. And in terms of our capacity for discipline, some of us also were not able to get sufficient discipline from our own parents because we became rebellious to some of the things that they did. We felt, look, this guy was too hard. Daddy, you know, somebody cannot just come and play with you, you know. But it has become a problem. And today, I can imagine when I ask a neighbor, his son, you know, he gives him high five when he gets home. You know, his little son will be giving neighbor high five. And I can imagine if I would try that with my dad. Or you, doctor, try that with your dad, that you want to get home and you
Dead
give
man.
your father a high five with all your friends in the house. I mean, you had crossed the lines. So it's, I think we need to go back to those things that made fatherhood easier, and made and get back to our. It's not, I don't want to call it religion, because you see, religion is not personal with God.
It's not a
There are
religion.
things that God expects a father to do. If we read the Bible very well, we will see where fathers nurtured, fathers looked after their family. They could give their life for their families. And, we need to go back to those things that make us real men. Reverend said the praying life is a struggle. In my own house, it's a big struggle. My wife will pray, pray, pray. Me, I will strive and do the prayer when I can and join in when I can. But you see, it means that I've abdicated one of my biggest roles. If I was to say I was a Christian, I would have abdicated the ability to lead the house, lead the home as the priest. I've relinquished that duty to my wife, willingly, and I do the backup. I'm doing the
You
backup,
say the grace.
which is not meant to be. I'm meant to be the one in front, and she will be at the back, and the children see it that way. Then I can imagine what will happen to them. They have a totally different age, when they grow up.
Or not, before I invite Debo, one thing that you mentioned that I want us to hold on to, that probably is, if I'm not giving an excuse, that's probably affecting fatherhood, is a breakdown of infrastructure.
Very much, very much.
When we were in school, also, I remember in grammar school, 20 naira was for my books. 20 naira, the whole books that you're going to collect in the school. So almost everybody could just echo out, how much it's going to cost you for the kind of quality of education that you were going to get. It was not going to cost a bomb. Now we see so many parents taking their children to some schools that they can even ill afford, and they have to be doing all kinds of things in order to pay school fees. And so that's probably one of the things that has affected us as fathers as well. The breakdown in government infrastructure also is not made fatherhood to be easier. But there are schools also that you can still afford. Yes, Mr. Yeah.
Yes, I was going to very, very seriously disagree with that.
Yeah.
And my point, and I'm sorry, I'm sure Debo wants to come in soon. Let me just quickly say that one of the biggest challenges is that people are not prepared for fatherhood anymore these days, and that's a fundamental thing. You're either prepared or you're not prepared. And if you're not prepared, don't go into it. So if you know the things that our fathers went through, my father, there were 9 of us, one mother. 9 of us. It was like Onor's father, a civil servant. And my father would have, it took me a long time to know that this man only had this 1 or 2 shirts, but he had many collars, and those collars were, they are detachable. And he would, so those collars, wash those collars and starch them and everything, he would look always clean, very well turned out. But guess what? It was only just that 1 shirt, the other one to change, and then you will wash it. So it was about discipline, it was about focus, it was about a person being, in all those 9 children, I never, my father, yes, was very, very firm, disciplinary, all of that was for him, everything. First of all, you have to know God and obey God, and then make sure that you are not looking onto man and all of that sort of thing. Yes, all of those values, a father ought to be able to provide, whether 300 years ago or 300 years to come. If a father is not ready for those things, that the society will continue to break down. So I think that's where it really rests. Of course, there are a lot more absentee fathers now, and there are a lot more, either single parents bringing children up, and of course, that with its own very, very, very many challenges. But if a man cannot afford to send his child to this kind of school, I agree that the infrastructure is not the way that it used to be when we were going to school. But, a child can still be well brought up. A child can go to a school inside a gutter, and still, the values will still be there. Even the things that you were being taught academically will still somehow, be there. I mean, all the luxuries may not be there, but a child will still be able to grow up, pretty well. So I think really it's about that breakdown.
Thank you. I think that's a very valid point, that one of the things that fathers are not giving their children now is the word values. They say you cannot give what you don't have. Maybe they don't, some of them don't even have it. Maybe some of them have lost it because of peer pressure, So values, one of the roles of the father is to transfer values to the children,
Yeah.
So, Devo, we're waiting for you. Give us your own perspective.
Okay. So for me and for those of us in my generation, at least most of people on the panel here, people I would regard to be within the generation of my dad. So my dad
Don't
was
make
in
us
the
feel
military.
old. Don't make us feel old.
No.
I am not in that generation.
Go on. I was just kidding.
Go on, Debo.
So my dad was in the military, and so automatically he's never always going to, he's never going, he's always going to be around. He wasn't. So my mom took up that responsibility, but there was one thing that stood out to me. My also, filled the gap. So at some point in my life, I lived with my uncles, I lived with my aunties, because my dad didn't want to try play the role. And for us, he did everything that my dad would have done. So when you misbehaved, you got spanked. He took us to school. If you did well in actually instill in their children hard work, discipline. But if you fast forward to our own time, where my son is just 2 years. It was 2 about a few months ago, and the kind of relationship my son and I have, I want to believe it's because it's just a toddler. At the same time, I try to still instill in him the and he doesn't need to have everything, because he has to try to give him, so I should just give him everything he wants. No. I believe that I should be able to teach child the basics of life, get to understand that everything you see out there has these things, but because you have had them, you should know you are lucky to, and you should appreciate the fact that you are being provided with such things. So that is where I have trained my child, But what I also see is a lot of disconnect. A lot of my friends was in school, and even in university, there was a lot of disconnect. I always tell my dad that you don't. He is a soldier, so once he expects that you go and carry it out. He doesn't want you to negotiate, And so that's where we always have the clash, because he never wants you to negotiate. But I believe that as a child and an adult, I think, can't we try this? Or he doesn't see it. So over time, each other. But what I found out is that most kids, what they begin to do is that they begin to pull out, and you find that disconnect over time. I talked about where the values begin to drop, because if the father is not consistently connected to this child, instilled in that child values, and they can't even learn from you. So for my generation, I think where a lot of us kind of missed it is we literally thought that they didn't know, live in the same house. You go to school that the child has actually disconnected from him, and that is what happened over the years. And so today you find a lot of you find a lot of children from even.
I think people might have dropped out.
People has dropped out. Okay, that is the quality of the internet from the young father.
Connectivity thing.
Now,
can I? Yeah.
One thing that Debo said, which I also want us to look at, is the fact that which Mr. Nobolu first raised in of the fathers, because the fathers were always there to say, okay, this is how this home is going to be run.
Yes.
All right. And so the women tended, and that's one thing about women, I think it depends on how, when people say it's the women who shape the homes, I don't believe. It's how the man has laid down the foundation of his home that his wife is going to help him. And that's what happened in our own time. Mothers, even when they don't agree with the decision of the fathers, it's like you already have a syllabus, they're going to carry it out. But you see in some homes now, the father and the mother, they are like in a competition. They don't even agree on the simplest of things. Do you think that also affects fatherhood? Or is the father who has refused to pass some simple litmus tests?
Can I say something, sir?
Yes, sir.
Well, number one, you discover that those days when the father was very authoritative and he was the one cutting the shot, most times the father was the breadwinner. Nowadays, mothers are equally working. And so it's like shared responsibility. And as a result of that, women seem to now have a voice in the home. But of course, I think also that the fathers are also not taking responsibilities enough in some homes. For a father to be able to have a voice, he must take responsibilities. A situation where the mother is the major provider of the basic things that the children need at home, the children are more likely to listen to that mother than the father. So one of the challenges I think fathers should take note today is that we should take responsibilities. That's number one. Number two, Mr. Nobolu mentioned something, I think maybe before the program started or during his first address, about the issue of the father figure. When we were growing up, there is this popular saying that 4 eyes give birth to a child, but 200 eyes
the community
bring the child up. In other words, the community has basic moral or ethical standard that they observe. And so if they see any child within the community who seems to err, they wouldn't wait until the father takes the responsibility. The people within the community will disapprove of the action of that child and reprimand him where necessary. But today, if you reprimand your neighbor's child, you may be in for it. So these are part of the societal decay that we have been talking about. So we seem to be more individualistic now in our present generation than the days of our fathers. And I think this is also affecting fatherhood as far as our relationship with, as our roles and responsibilities with our children are concerned. Then as we were talking, I began to also imagine, is it every father that actually know their roles in the home? I think this is also very, very important, because if you don't know your responsibility, if you don't know your roles, you may not be able to act as you are expected. So this, I think, is also an issue that we should look at. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, so good. Do we want to, of course, there's no syllabus for fatherhood, but maybe, I think from what we have been saying, can we just maybe summarize what are the qualities, what makes a good father? Maybe let me put it that way. What makes a good father? Before I come to the economic point that Pastor raised.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
I think earlier on, I hinged this thing basically on the failure of fathers. There's a book written by a gentleman called John Searles. We call it the fatherless generation. And basically he says that, that no generation has seen as much voluntary father absence as this one. And this book was written possibly something like 4 or 5 years ago. It's that failure. People just don't want to take on responsibility. And since today is Father's Day, I think it's important that we stay somewhere there. What makes a good father? A good father is a pillar of strength. A good father is a pillar of support, of discipline. A good father is a mentor. He's a coach. He's a hero. The role of a father is a very complex role. And that's where many people miss it. It's like you said, there's no syllabus, no school for it. But you know, that same man has to balance so many things. He's a villain, he's an oppressor, he's a disciplinarian, he's an authoritative figure. He's a confidant, very, very key. He's a compass, he's a supporter, he's a cheerleader. I'd like young people to pay attention to something. A man, a good father, is an epistle. It's not really about dictating things. It's really about living your life and then letting your children read that life. Many, many times now, what you find, how do you expect a child is inside the car, and I watch many people do this. A child is inside the car. Hello, where are you? They are to catch a roundabout. Where are you? I'm just getting down at Abuja right now. And these are the things that children see. I mean, a good father anywhere in the world would not do that. A good father must model integrity. He must model strength of character. He must model tenacity, focus, love, compassion, respect for others, and honesty. It's a whole lot of things. He must love his children unconditionally. You can have several children. You must recognize that children are very different. And you know, the way one particular child reacts to something is totally different from the way another child reacts. The makeup of one particular child is totally different from the other one. A good father has to be very open and honest as well with his children. It's not that issue of I was always the first in class. A father must be prepared to be vulnerable and apologize if he has wronged or done something wrong, because these children, they're supposed to be learning. He must be, he also must not discriminate, like I said, and he must, very importantly, and I'm sure Reverend will pick up on this, he must speak very positive things into the lives of his children. And this is not only just a religious thing, it's not just a Christian thing. I mean, it's in any, if you are at work or if you're at whatever, if everything you hear in your life is negative, you never amount to anything, you just end up like your father or like your mother. You'll end up like all these stupid people on the street. That's everything that child listens to. I remember just now a joke that we heard. So I'm sure many people heard it. When they ask a small child, "What's your father's name?" It says Olori Buruku. You know, and where does that come from? That's what the mother, calls the father. So anytime they have a Olori Buruku, will soon come now, and so it's really about us being ready for. Listen, a father is a man who expects his children to be what he has not been able to be. He has very high hopes for his children and nurtures them and pushes them towards that. He does not necessarily lecture them if we are going to get it right, because there's a great balance there between that old authoritarian parenting style and the things that can help in modern day times. Yes, things have changed a lot, but a good father must be able to live his life and let his children watch him. He must give them space to be themselves, not dictate their careers or their lives and things like that. And he must not project his own biases into their life, racial biases, tribal biases. He must not marry an Igbo man, must not do this, must not touch Asian people, or his own tribal sentiments, his professional, vocational preferences. You cannot. A good father, is the person who is also ready to be generous with everything, generous with his time, with his talent, with his wisdom, is always there for the people in the family. Yes, he's prayerful. He's a pillar of emotional well-being in every respect. So he instills that overall sense of well-being and that self-confidence in children. I mean, when there is no father, the research has been very, 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 very clear. Children are way better off when in the relationship, when there's a father figure there. When there is no father there, I mean, the kinds of things that we see are really, really, really dismal. I mean, our environment doesn't have research figures, but in places where research figures exist, and with the kind of parenting style and absenteeism that we have these days, in America, for instance, they say 85% of gang members, 75% of teen pregnancies, 65% of suicides, and 75% of drug users come from fatherless homes.
Mm.
And all of these children suffer rejection, and that generation, again, I think the Reverend alluded to it earlier on, there's no way that generation will believe God or love God. It's very difficult. Because, there's no sincerity. Yeah, the things that they see, our fathers really modeled what they talked about and what they wanted us to do and what God wanted of people. And they would, on us, mentioned the other time that his father was very, you wouldn't catch him, stealing or taking government, whatever. I've witnessed my father running on the streets after people in vehicles from a market and saying, "Madam, who is the owner of it? Who gave you this car? This is a government car." And the woman brings it to the market. And he is like, what do you think you are doing? I mean, it's about those values and all of those. It's a very complex thing to be a father, very complex, but you are either ready or you are not. If you are not ready, Apostle Paul says, stay. And if you are either ready or you are ready, it's true. If you are ready, fine. If you are not ready, then, leave the thing alone. Children don't ask to be born. But once you're going to go into that thing, I do not want to, the air does not allow us to say the other proverb I was going to say just now. I rest.
Okay, so what I'm getting, before Pastor comes in, I know Pastor wants to come in. Before he comes in.
Can I ask a question, sir?
Sure.
So, for someone like me, or for those of us who are just starting being fathers, how do you balance being very strict and authoritarian and also being a confidant? Because I saw that that's where a lot of people in my generation kind of lost the connection with their dads because they felt that he was too strict.
Okay. Well, it's stopping, but
And you
what I
just
hear
stayed
him say is,
away
okay,
and started confiding in friends and other people out there.
come, hello,
Was to pull them into other kinds of social vices. How do you balance that when your children begin as a confident and of course still be rebellion in the house where you can lay down the rules and they can.
Yes.
yeah.
Can I come in, sir?
Pastor, you want to say something?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, from what has been said, one of the things that we must take note of is that the presence of the father at home is crucial. Learning is by information and observation. So if we inform our children and they also see what we are telling them in our lives, I think it will go a long way to convincing them of our position. So that is very, very crucial. I think Mr. Onabolu also mentioned it. We should be able to live by example. So we are not just instructing them, we are also living out the life. So they are seeing it in us. I think this is very, very important. You can be, you don't necessarily have to be a disciplinarian to discipline your child. Disciplining a child has to do with letting the child know what is the right thing.
Right.
What is right, what is wrong, and insisting that the wrong is wrong. That's discipline. And if you are disciplined and you are not disciplined in love, the child will misunderstand you and is likely to rebel. And that is why when you are disciplining a child, you must take time to explain to the child why you are disciplining the child. Absolutely. That will convince the child. All right? So the roles of the father, as has been mentioned, is very complex. Very, very complex. But I think that if we take responsibility, even those of us who have been in the fatherhood for some time, we are still learning. So learning is a continuous process. So however complex fatherhood is, let's take responsibility. Let us learn more and more so that we can have something to actually hand over to the generation that is coming. Thank you, sir.
Yes, okay. So, Debo, I got here, but you know, sometimes also, I think sometimes we just like Mr. Onobulu said earlier, you might have to individualize each child.
Yes, sir.
Absolutely.
So there's some children that you might not be able to win them to be their confidant. But somebody, one of you must be doing it. Because some children are tough. I'm lucky, maybe I don't have such children, okay? But I know some children are very tough. Okay, well, don't let me say I don't have, but I'm still lucky when I see what happens in some homes, you know? And so you see that you have to balance, you know, you've seen all the roles that have been highlighted. You sometimes now have to say, okay, for this child, what is the most important role I need to play? You might not be playing the same role in the life of each child. Do you understand? You have a combo role. But there are some things that must be highlighted in some children. That you know, this one, if I don't do this, this is what's going to happen to this child. But that's why there are two of you.
Yeah.
So when one is bad cop, good cop. So when one is a bad cop, for a particular child, one must always be a good cop. So I think we need to, so that we don't push these children also outside, that they can only confide in other people and they can't confide in either you or your wife.
Their mother, yes.
So it's very important. And you will see, if you have many of them, you'll see that there's some that you will probably be the person they can confide in. Some it will be their mom. But you must always make sure that they can confide in one of you. Because just like Mr. Onobolu said, that's very, very key. That I remember when my daughter first entered Unilag, and that was the first time she was going to mix with other girls. And then she came home and said, Mommy, if you see what these people are doing. So she was telling us all the time what was happening in her room. And so we were able to guide her, because it was strange to her that girls our age can behave that kind of way. So, but if there was nobody she could talk to, we would have been in big trouble. So it's always very important. And one thing also I got from Reverend is this area of consistency. Being a father is a big deal.
It's a 24-hour
And Mr.
job.
Onobolu also alluded to that. Now, men just want convenience.
Yes.
You must be, even when you are hurting, you need to say, okay, this is what we are going to do in this family. You know, and please, what thing I see again, that many men now live above their means.
Too many.
And that brings a lot of problems into the home. When you are earning 10 naira and you are spending 15 naira,
Voila.
So I think, I tell people that it's not until your children go to this particular school before they can turn out good.
Well.
Because the most important thing, as we have been saying, is that the father should transfer values to the children. The education, look, so many people went to many schools, though, that I don't want to mention, Ivy League schools, that they are not doing well in life. So it's not the school you went to that is going to make you in life. It's your values that are going to make you. And fathers are particularly responsible for values. So how does a father show love? Because I think we need to round up in another 2-3 minutes. How does the father show love? Because what we have been describing is almost like a bad man. You know what a bad man means. In movies, in those days, there used to be the villain. Yeah, I think Mr. Onobolu also mentioned it. So how does it show love?
Yeah.
Can I talk?
Yes.
It looks like Reverend wants to talk.
Yes,
Yes. Part of what we have been saying, number one, the father should be available. You can't show love remotely. So the father must be available. Secondly, the father should be able to provide within the limits of his resources. If there is a demand that he cannot meet, he should be able to explain to the child. Third, the father must discipline the child. Part of love is discipline. As a matter of fact, if you truly love a child, you should discipline the child. So, and then of course, part of love is ensuring that the child see good example in your life, just as we have been saying. Live a life of example that the child can emulate. Well, because of our time, we may not have that opportunity to come back, but I like to say this, and I think that is where we started from. Fatherhood begins with God. Every father must try to mirror God. this issue of love that we are talking about, God is a God of love. And because he's a God of love, he loves us unconditionally. We have identified the fact that children cannot be the same. But it doesn't matter the differences in our children, we must express love unconditionally to them. And it is in the demonstration of our love to them that they can actually imbibe the values that we want them to imbibe. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much. Yes. Mr. Nobolu, do you want to add anything to that?
Yes, I think in addition to that, like I said, the father is a very complex person. Some values are really, really very important for a father. When we're talking love, when we're talking all of that, number one, wisdom. A father needs a lot of wisdom. A father needs a lot of patience and flexibility. You cannot, if you're going to be friends with your children, and I dare say that it is most important for you to first and foremost be friends with your children. Like Pastor said, it does not mean that you don't discipline them. The key thing is communication and explaining. Let a child, and I believe that Debo was asking that question the other time, so long as a child can understand, the reason that you are doing something. Sorry, we're not going to be able to do this because it is not right, or because it is not expedient, or because we cannot afford it, or we cannot. Let him understand. Thereafter, a father must be firm, but a father must use wisdom as well. Sometimes, when you might find yourself having to, as a matter of fact, spend a lot of time, resources, and everything on a particular child's weakness or a particular child's strength, or on a, because again, that's what you are. You're that coach, that mentor, that compass. You're understanding things. You must show that wisdom, that patience, to be able to ensure that the other children do not feel also either neglected, or that there's a feeling of preference and all of that. It's a tough thing. Nobody goes to school for it. But by and by, the important thing is that your transparency and your love, which Pastor said, unconditional, just like the love of God for us, it must show through. And once that shows through, many other things can follow. I mean, if you look at our national life today, the reason that people don't follow many things is that they can't see transparency there. And they know that you're saying one thing and doing the other. However, if your father knows, and one of the strong points of those of a great father anywhere in the world, and those fathers of old, was that they were very consistent, and they were very truthful, very honest. They had integrity, and once children can see that, then it makes the job easier. But it's never going to be an easy ride.
To walk in the park.
Thank you. Onos, anything you want to add to this?
Yeah, just reiterating some of those values that once you have them, you'll be an epitome for your children to always look up to. Is that one, you have to have integrity. It's one value that has been totally eroded in this generation, and the ones coming behind us. Their yes is not their yes. Their yes could be no. Their no could be yes. They'll be shaking head like India.
And everything is about money.
Then money is an issue. Everybody, we've all lost it, where we think the only thing we need is money. Today I was reading a story about the child of one of Nigeria's richest men. And the daughter was a 20-year-old girl having a photo shoot and very revealing clothing. And I think the parents were okay with it. That permissiveness is one of the things that I fear the most. That we need to be able to rein in what we call excessive permissiveness. So people don't just think that anything goes, because it's ruling the world. The child wants to go to an all-night concert. Yeah, it's like 21, 19, 21. And I asked them, I said, how do you want to get there? And, by the time you investigate, you know that there's a lie in between the stories. So I tell you cannot go, But that consistency and our ability to remain steadfast and straightforward. So you let them know what they can do and what they cannot do. And with a lot of strength in keeping the home, perseverance, prayer, doing the things that you need to do as a dad, I think we'll all get through this.
Thank you so much, Onos. Debo, anything that you because we are rounding up.
Debo, I think it's shut off again.
Okay, so
just one statement, sir.
Yeah.
Just a statement,
okay.
sir.
Yes, sir.
I want to say that the society should not dictate to the family. The family should dictate to the society. And this is very, very crucial because, yes, the family is living within the society, but the unit of life is actually within the family. So if the family can successfully transfer good moral values to the children, it will impact positively on our society. And like it's usually said, charity begins from home. So if the family, if the father can take up the responsibility and inculcate the right moral values, train a child in the way he should go, the Bible says. When he grows up, he will not depart from it. So whatever the society may be dangling before him, he already has a background where he's coming from, and he can be able to say no or yes to whatever the society is presenting to the child. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. So, Debo, you want to add anything?
I said, wow, I've really learned a lot. There's nothing more to add, really.
Fantastic. So I think we'll just conclude by saying that we know that probably the decadence in the society comes from failure of fatherhood.
Yeah.
Because just like Pastor said, we are allowing the society to dictate to what will happen in our families. We are not the ones controlling the society. And one of the things that Prince Charles said is that I learned the way monkeys learn by observing my parents. So when the father fails in the home,
the home fails.
The society fails.
The society fails.
So and that's what we are seeing. And we have said that the person that the father, the day the meaning of being a father occurred to me was the day when he said, husbands, love your wives, And he said, as Christ gave himself. So the role of the father is so sacrificial. But now we see people, they just want to stay in their own comfort zone. They don't want, just like you described, what did our fathers do for us? They sacrificed. That this my child will have a good education. If I have to sell the property, I must make sure I invest in him and this. But we don't get that anymore. Rather, people want to marry into rich families. They want to do all kinds of things, looking for shortcuts to get money. And that's why we are where we are. So thank you very much for all of you for your wonderful guests. Mr. Nobolu, it's so good to have you. Reverend, wonderful having you. Mr. Moloku, wonderful that you are here with us. And Mr. Adelanwa,
thank you very much.
Great that we could have your views. So I'm sure many of our viewers will have enjoyed themselves and they must have learned one thing or the other. So thank you so much. And I'll see you in 2 weeks' time.
Thank you.
Don't do what I want.
All right. Thank you, Doc.
Happy Father's Day.
Thank you.
Happy Father's Day.
Bye. Happy Father's Day. Happy Father's Day.